Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, session number 4. Hi everyone, this is Peter Renton and thank you for joining me here on the Lend Academy podcast, the first one for 2014. Happy New Year. So today we have Simon Cunningham joining us. He is the founder and chief blogger at LendingMemo.com. And Simon I've known since well before we started LendingMemo, and we'll get into some of the details of that in the podcast. And he is one of the few people that has dedicated himself, just like me, to the peer-to-peer lending industry, writing about it, covering it on his blog, and I'm excited to have a chat with him today. So enjoy the podcast. Great. Well, welcome to the podcast, Simon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. So want to get, as we get started here, want to really give the listeners some sort of feel for who you are and what your background is. Can you just... Sure. You just share a little bit about yourself so people can get to know the Simon Cunningham of LendingMemo?
Yeah, let's see here. So I am originally from Michigan. I moved out to Seattle about 4.5 years ago. I really fell in love with the city. It's a very smart, interesting, educated city. And so my background is actually in social statistics when I was in college. And then I kind of had a long detour and became a pastor for a number of years. And then now I work doing a peer-to-peer lending education site. So, yeah. Okay.
So then, what drew you to peer-to-peer lending? What did you, when did you find out about it? And what really decided you wanted to make this, your career?
Right. Well, it's changed over the years. I mean, I would be interested to hear your answer to that as well, because I assume it's changed as well. But when I started, I mean, it hasn't changed dramatically, but it's gotten more nuanced. So when I began doing this thing, I was just looking for self-direction, and I was looking for social responsibility. And I guess that's pretty much stayed the same. It just has a slightly different tone to it. I think now I'm really in love with the concept of efficiency and the inefficiency that can go along with a banking institution. But when I first started, I was attracted by what Scott Sanborn at Lending Club really, and I've been trying to write a post on this concept, but Scott's mentioned the idea of comprehensiveness. And that is when I first got a job, I had this money that I was supposed to set aside for retirement, like a good, responsible 30-year-old new employee. And I was looking at all these socially responsible, because I'm really into social responsibility. Like, there are moral ways to invest money. There are ways to invest money that help, and there are ways to invest money that hurt, right? And it's not maybe too dramatic, but there is a way to do it that's maybe better or worse. And so, and some people might disagree with that, but that's my opinion. And so I found this socially responsible mutual fund, and what was so hard for me was, not only was the mutual fund not necessarily socially responsible once I looked at the holdings of it, but even more so, when you invest into a mutual fund, you basically just kind of wave goodbye to your money. It's like a kid going off to college. You just hope it comes back in one piece, and you do your best at choosing the right college and setting up all the variables. And this isn't to say peer-to-peer lending doesn't include risk, but you basically wave goodbye to your cash, and you kind of, it just disappears into the mist. But what's so beautiful about a self-directed IRA or a taxable account at Lending Club is exactly, you watch your money filter from through the system. There's no, it's so efficient. There's no the connection between borrowers and sellers is so close that exactly where your pennies are going, until they hit the checking account of those borrowers, which then you have no idea where it goes. But so just that comprehensiveness was the main thing that initially attracted me. And then second of all was the social responsibility. I mean, these are people who are finally, because of the risk pricing is so beautiful in an efficient instrument like a peer-to-peer loan, these are people who truly deserve a good credit rate, and they're getting it finally. They're getting access to credit that they should have had a long time ago, but that the banking structures just don't allow that to happen. So if I, those are my two big entry points. One is, it is good to get people out of debt, period. Right? That's a good thing. In our society, people, we want to get them out of debt. That isn't to say there aren't times to take on debt, obviously, but at the end of the day, we want to get out of debt. And so helping people get out of debt, consolidate, specifically getting out from under credit cards, beautiful. That is like social responsibility right there. And then the second thing is the comprehensibility of this investment. I know exactly where my investment is going. It's not disappearing into some 0.05% goes to MasterCard Incorporated and 0.02% goes. I mean, it's, what does that even mean? I don't know, right? But when I put $25 to this borrower in that city with this credit score, it's like, I know I'm in control, and in that sense, I have an ability to really feel confidence and feel in charge of my own investments.
Sure. Yep. Indeed. So then, do you remember when you first found out about it?
Oh, probably 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, probably 2 years ago. So then, you were the headmaster of the social lending network back then.
Right. Indeed. Yes.
And it was LendStats was all the rage.
Yep.
And boy, have times changed. So.
Yep. They sure have. And that's So you basically. You found out about it. You liked it. You opened up an account at Lending Club. Was it when you
That's
at
correct.
First? And when was that?
My first Lending Club account was opened in September of 2011.
Okay. So a bit over 2 years ago now. So, and then you obviously you liked it, and you decided that this was something more than just a passing kind of, or just more than just a part of your investment portfolio.
Yeah.
So then how did you go from opening up an account at Lending Club to really 15 months later starting up LendingMemo? I mean, what was the process in that time frame?
I think it had something to. Well, first of all, there's this really cheesy phrase I learned in college. I went to one of these cheesy liberal arts colleges, which was all about where does your passion meet the world's need kind of thing. And I all the cheesy phrases aside, I really felt like peer-to-peer lending connected with who I was as a person. Mm-hmm. So while I would make the generalization to say every American needs 10% of their retirement portfolio in peer-to-peer lending, period, I feel personally for myself that this investment class matches up with my own character. And I was doing kind of alternative, creative Christian church planting. And so I needed some sort of secondary thing to do. I didn't necessarily need the money, but I did have all this freedom. I had some extra time in my week, maybe 10 or 15 hours a week to set aside. And I thought, boy, this sounds like a fun project to do. Well, but Mr. Renton, the first thing I did was apply to you for a job.
I know. And that's what people should actually. I actually got a letter in the mail, not an email, but a letter in the mail from Simon.
I did.
When it was back sometime in 2012, I believe, because I think I actually was out of the country because I spent 6 months in Sydney in 2012, and I was getting my mail forwarded there. But regardless, I just felt like I didn't have, I felt like my position wasn't big enough to sustain more than one person. It wasn't big enough to sustain one person, let alone somebody else. So as much as I would have liked to have, but it's worked out well, I think, because we've got two voices now in the industry that are are dedicated to this investment. So I think it's worked out well. So you basically, obviously, I said I'm sorry, I'd love to hire you, but I can't. And then what did you do?
Then I said, all right, well, how do I do this? So sat down in my living room and whiteboarded out about 50 or 60 domain names. And I had some interesting ones, because now that I look back on it, I was like, okay, how do I have a domain name which I feel is matches up with what because I'm really into narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really love doing.
Yep.
I'm not really, you're very excellent at covering what's going on in this industry. And I'm more of a macro guy. Like I like taking a step back and looking at the larger picture. And I don't think, I think I will always be a long form writer. And that's what I really appreciate. And so I wanted it to match some sort of peer-to-peer lending site that matched that part of my character. But I remember, whiteboarding out all these domain names. I remember I came up one domain name it's funny to think back to this, but when I first started, I remember I had one domain name called greenyelloworange.com because the idea was investing in low grade loans, and that was D's, E's, and F's. Right. And that was like, so I had funny ideas like that. But anyway, I eventually went with LendingMemo, which is actually taken off of the political blog Talking Points Memo. And if you look at our early design, it's actually in many ways copying Joshua Marshall's Talking Points Memo, which is long form political journalism. And I thought I could be long form lending journalism.
Yeah.
So
okay.
that's kind of how it began. So
cool. Yeah, that's good. And I think I think it's great for people who are passionate about this space to have the different voices. So I like your long form narrative style, and I think it provides, it's complementary to what I'm doing at Lend Academy, I think. So
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So then you start up LendingMemo, but actually let's say you can go back before then. You started investing in Lending Club.
Yep.
You mentioned that you like the D's, E's, and F's. Like how did you start? What was your strategy? And did you do much research before you got going, or how did that all happen?
Well, I opened up $1,000 account with Lending Club, taxable, and I remember your how to invest in Lending Club in 2011 or whatever post you had back then. And it said, you've always talked about your favorite filter is inquiries equals 0. And so I thought, all right, well, that sounds like a decent place to begin. So I did B's, C's, and D's, and I did inquiries equals 0. And I was able to invest maybe $400 or $500 that way. And then to be honest, I remember looking back at lensstats.com and which was basically kind of the nickel steamroller of 2011. And it was a lot of letters and numbers. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of information. And we all owe a great deal to Ken for having done that. But for, brand new people to the field like me, the deluge of information was so great that I didn't even know what to do with it. And so it took me about 4 or 5 months before I really started to understand, like statistically small business loans perform lower, mm-hmm. or statistically, particularly on Prosper back in those days, repeat borrowers are basically a gold mine, mm-hmm. So these things kind of took time, and I had to play with the tools. I spent hours on those tools back when I was first learning them. And now, all these years later, I have the ability to know, okay, you know what? Like, is it surprising that, again, borrowers from California performed a half point lower than everybody else? Like, no, that doesn't surprise me. I don't need to, check that every single time. Although I would be interested to see if the risk pricing adjusts for state, but I don't even know if they're allowed to do that. But,
yeah, I don't think it does. I don't think so. It does. I'm not 100% certain on that, but that's
right.
Yeah.
So always a good filter, people. Take out your Californian borrowers.
Although they have been performing better. They have been performing better. In 2013, they performed a lot better, and I actually now include them. I think I've got one filter still left that excludes them, but I have been, and you'll see that I'll be doing my 2014 update here in a while.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to publish my own filters for the first time in this year, because to be honest, the last year I've learned so much that and my approach has changed so dramatically that I didn't feel like I could even publish anything because it would just be different a month or two later.
Right.
So
yeah, I had that as well. I actually have this Evernote document that lists all the filters I've ever used since I started doing this seriously, and how they've evolved.
Yeah, you're more meticulous than me. I'm not that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's funny to go back and look
Right.
because this was I spent, I don't know, at least 100 hours on
Oh yeah.
LendStats and
Oh yeah.
just
Yep.
going through all the different things
Yep.
and I did the same thing, and then now it's been reasonably stable now for quite some
Right.
time. Even if you
Right.
look back at my 2013 to 2012 was pretty stable, and 2014 is going to be not it's not that different
Right.
from 2013. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also interested to have Bryce Mason take my whatever filter I decide on and throw it into his magic formula and see what kind of dot I get on the.
Right. Right. Yeah. So let's talk about Prosper for a minute. So obviously you started off with Lending Club. When did
Right.
you jump on board with Prosper, and what's been the strategy there?
When did I jump on board Prosper? Probably 8 months, 6 months later, something like that.
Okay.
And it was again, threw $1,000 in there and said, what is this? How does this work? Yeah, I think Prosper was a little different for me in that it felt like the site was not as, it's hard. It's kind of hard to talk about. Lending Club, its user interface back then was really rough, but at least it was simple. Prosper's was much more defined. Like it had lots of hover over links. Like, brand new people who are investing don't know what debt to income ratio even means.
Mm-hmm.
And so on Prosper, they had these nice hover links where you could kind of move your mouse over the DTI and the definition would pop up. But that said, the site was incredibly verbose. It just was very wide versus Lending Club. It feels a little more succinct to me, even if the user interface was kind of rough. I don't know if this is making sense, but anyway, back then when I first started Prosper, it was a little bit like, okay, it took a little bit. Basically, that's what I'm saying is the learning curve was, I had a little bit of a learning curve, but eventually things got going. And I wish I would have, to be honest, I wish I would have jumped on this repeat borrower bandwagon back when you were heralding that trumpet, because when I by the time that I got all excited about it, they had figured out the risk pricing, and now it's, we don't have that benefit as much anymore. So
yeah, I still remember the day when they dropped. I think it was 5% overnight. They dropped.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Are you going to have a special repeat borrowers filter in your new filters?
Yeah, my repeat borrower filters just are not there. I am not finding many anymore.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, it's been, it got down to like, I think one a month or something like
Right.
that. It's just because you can still do repeat borrowers, but you can't do repeat borrowers and do like 6 other filters, which is what I was what I was doing. It's just not,
Right.
just doesn't find enough
Right.
loans. So yeah, repeat borrowers, I feel like there just isn't that much of an advantage there,
Right.
because they've been priced. They're priced really at, they're more. And before, I think, when you were getting a D or E grade repeat borrower at 25% that had 26 on time payments from their previous loan, that was just such a solid investment that wasn't worth 22% or whatever they were charging, and then they dropped it overnight by 5%, and that became a little bit more. I think it still was worthwhile for quite some time, but this year or the last 2013, I've noticed there's just the numbers just drop off, particularly from the filters that I had.
So you're not going to include it, are you?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to talk about it. It won't be one of my one of my active filters.
Interesting.
It's just,
that's a change.
Yeah, it is a change, and that's the thing that continues to evolve. And the thing I like and the thing I'm happy about is I still have a bunch of those repeat borrowers that were overpriced. That I think I've got about a year left on them, or actually not quite a year now. It'd be probably about 6 or 8 months left on those people, because it was that was a sweet deal for quite some time. But so then what has your strategy been with your Prosper account?
I mean, I kind of touched on it on my last quarterly update, but it basically has to do with the idea that, okay, so, here are some pretty standard, and this is not controversial. This is my opinion here, but I do think that small business loans have a higher default rate. That's a pretty safe generalization to make. I do not loan to Florida or California or Georgia or Nevada. So I've always taken those things, but for every single time you cut out another one of those kind of danger zones, you're cutting down the amount of available loans that you have. And so if you want to put money to work, you can't be super particular about the results that you're getting. And then, of
Yep.
course, there's the whole concept, which Bryce Mason would say, is that there's no real evidence that this filtering even works at all. I would say, look at my returns. That's all the evidence I need. But, so it's controversial, right? It's hard to answer this question. What is the correct investing strategy to take? So, my approach has been to try to do the best I can with the filtering that I do, which is finding the lowest grades I can. So for the last year, I've only invested in E's and HRs on Prosper, and then trying to cut off as many of the slightly, the negative qualifiers as possible. So taking out Florida, California borrowers, or whatever. Taking out those sort of things are and usually that results in very few loans available. And so then I have to back off on my filters until it kind of meets in some sort of equilibrium with how much cash keeps flowing into my account.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point, because and also think it's different when you're putting new money to work than when you're reinvesting. If you're putting new money to work, you've got to be a little broader, because you're just never going to get your money invested if you have the really tight criteria. It's going to take you forever. But,
that's right. Yeah. So, for instance, I just put another $2,000 into my Prosper account, and now I'm going to have to open up to D and even some C grades, which is, I haven't invested in C grades for a year or two, but I found some decent C grade filters, and I'm going to go for it. So
interesting. I've added C into the mix in the last. That's been one of the changes you'll see.
Cool.
I added C into the mix this year simply because I wanted more volume, and if you look at Lending Club, the volume is in the A's, B's, and C's. That's the vast majority of their volume. So if you and C's, I think if you can get 15% on a C, I think that's decent. I think
sure, and I bet the volatility is going to be lower than the lower grades anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so then how do you actually invest, like on a day-to-day basis? Do you log on to Lending Club and Prosper? Do you use the API? And I know you've used nickel steam NSR Premium, but how are you doing it how are you executing your orders these days?
Yeah, I think you and I are probably both doing it through NSR Premium. Is that correct? Or
I have 6 accounts, so I have I basically have 4 of my 6 through NSR Premium, and I've got 1 Prosper and 1 Lending Club that I do manually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I do it all through NSR, so I only have 2 accounts. So I had 3, and I liquidated my opening Lending Club account. But I have 2, and I do it through the API that Michael does. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. So that means so how often are you actually logging in? Then you don't use the retail interface at all then anymore.
Well, I use it to maintain the account. So, I have to log back into Lending Club probably once a week and put notes into portfolios. And then I log into Prosper just to check and see what my net annualized return is doing, which I have to say, I think the whole platform has, I feel like a year or 2 ago, we were earning 15%, and it feels like everyone in the kind of more retail investor hacker world that you and I are a part of. Hacker's not the correct term, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
It feels like we're all dropping to 11% or 12%. So
yeah, I think that's that. I mean, part of it is a function of the portfolio's aging and it's it's dropping as it ages, which is appropriate. And part of it is the fact that if you look, I remember when I used to look at the average interest rate at Prosper, it was always over 20%.
Yeah, and now it's
down to 15.
15. There you go. And so it's the new management team. Curses, you new management team, bringing down my earnings by 4%. Well, how dare you?
I think you can complain about that, but the new management team has certainly done a phenomenal job.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, they're great guys. In fact, I couldn't be happier with Steven and Aaron. They truly are great guys, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with Prosper in the coming 12 months. So
yeah, I think it's going to be a big year for everybody. But
so
let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about Folio. And I know you had this post on your blog a few months ago, talking about your Folio experiment. Was that the experiment of liquidating your taxable account? Was that what you were doing?
That turned out to be the most work I have ever taken. I mean, and it's all behind the scenes. Like people have no idea. I have logged into that dumb taxable account and repriced Folio loans 3 times, or every 3 days for the last 6 months, and it's been way too much work. So I would never, ever recommend anybody do what I did. And then I don't even know how valid this data is. But that said, I do have a bunch of data now to be able to talk about. Now, here's an interesting, so just to introduce this to people who are listening, this was called the Liquidity Project. So the idea was, there's never been an article online about how to liquidate your Lending Club account statistically, having, somebody has done this statistically and has a good kind of basis for this is the current thresholds for where you should price your loans if you want to sell them. Because obviously you can just price everything to sell and things are going to be gone pretty quickly. Like just price it with no premiums at all. But what you can see in my data is that you can actually get a decent premium and still liquidate your account in 3 days. So where is that premium threshold? And so that's basically what I set out to do. How fast I set out to discover how fast can you liquidate an account and still get a premium for the loans that you possess, especially if they're being paid back on time. And so what I found is basically this. My E, F, and G grade loans were gone very quickly. I mean, like amazingly quickly. And they were gone at like a 9-10% markup.
9 or 10?
9 or 10.
Even what about with a declining credit score?
I think that at that time, none of them had a declining credit. They all had positive credit. This was again the reason why filtering is so good, is because oftentimes the filters can compensate for a low credit score or whatever. But yeah, I don't think any of them had declining credit. In fact, I have the note here that says what were people's credit doing back then, and it said up, up, up. So apparently these are all people who's had a FICO change that was going up.
Sure. And
D's, E's, and F's, not D's, but E's, F's, and G's, boy, those notes were gone very, very quickly. So, and then the next kind of large group were sold around 3%, and the next large group were sold around 0%. And then I had a few notes that I even had to price it at 3 or 4% discount.
Even though these are current notes you're talking about.
Current notes, correct. Right. Yeah. So which is... Now, this said, I don't want to put too much stock in my data because Folio's economy may have changed because this study that I'm doing, it took 5 months.
Right.
So I don't know how good this data is, but it's something.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very useful, I think, because that's something that, I mean, if you look on the Lend Academy forum, people want to know this sort of stuff all the time. And, there's... Sure. What do you price a loan that's in grace period? What do you price a loan that's current with a declining credit score?
Yeah,
that's I think it's very useful, and we I know there are some people who dedicate their lives to Folio on my forum.
Yeah, those are the real cowboys.
Yes, they are the cowboys in the Wild West. Indeed, they are. And but it's been that they've got a lot of this data now. They share bits and pieces, but a lot of them are pretty careful with they don't want to give away their secret source.
Right.
But so I think it's great that you're doing that. Are you gonna do a post on this in the near future?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I even was talking to you today. I'm still working on the data, trying to get it all smoothed out because, for instance, I did not. It was so much work. Here's another example of how much work this was. For the first month that I did this, I tried to do corresponding notes through Prosper. So I tried to match up the notes that I was selling on Lending Club, and then I was going to have similar notes, so like similar interest rated notes on Prosper, and then I was going to sell them each at a similar threshold and see how the Folio markets compared. But you know what? I totally gave up on Prosper because if you sell a note on let's say you post a note on Folio FN on Prosper, and then you try to reprice it, it doesn't renew the sale, so that it still cancels after 7 days.
Right.
So versus on Lending Club, if you post something on Folio and then you go in and reprice it 3 days later, it refreshes your posted note for another 7 days. So you just keep repricing it for 6 months like I did.
Right.
But and considering Prosper doesn't have portfolios, I had to go deep into my notes every time and find these individual notes to try to. It was just like ridiculous amounts of work. So I gave that up after 3 weeks. I was like, forget it. Sorry, Prosper. You guys. So if I could make one request, to the management team in Prosper, it's to be able to change your folio. I mean, there's a lot of folio work that they need to do, but one of the main things is to be able to renew your folio sales every time you reprice them, because that allows people to keep their notes for sale, and to continually reprice them until they're gone.
Right.
So,
yep. No, it's a good. Prosper has the other challenge that you can't actually even sell late notes.
Right.
Whatsoever.
Yeah. Which they should change that, because their economy is scaled to the degree. I think they could enable that, but that's their choice.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Then you don't have the other additional states as well. But
right.
So there's several things that, and I'm Prosper. I'm always surprised that there are definitely buyers on Folio and Prosper when I've priced a note there for sale, because I'm not a heavy user of Folio at all. I rarely use it. The only time I really use it is when someone asks me who I know, or they're a reader of the blog, or they ask me to invest in their loan.
Interesting.
I typically do it, but if it's an A grade loan, I don't want to hold that loan, so I will just go ahead. I've helped fund their loan once it's funded, and they've made a couple of payments. I'll offload it on Folio and sell it there. And I'm surprised I typically price these things, at no premium whatsoever. Yeah, but they sell no problem at all.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we're running out of time here, but I wanted to get just to have a discussion with you about this year and beyond, the future of peer-to-peer lending. We just crossed over into a new year.
Yeah,
and I did my predictions post earlier last week, and just wanted to get your take on what you see, not just for this year, but for in the coming years, how peer-to-peer lending you think is going to change.
Well, you touched on it. It's the big. We're going to continue to grow in validity nationally. So this peer-to-peer lending continues. I mean, if you walk down the street and you stop some random person, you say, "Hey, have you ever heard about Lending Club?" They haven't. That's still the reality of the situation.
Yep.
Even in a savvy city like Seattle, people don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
You walk down the street and you ask if they've ever heard of the stock market. Everyone knows about it. So so there is, it's still, I don't think it's going to become popular yet, but I do think it is going to continue to gain validity in the national kind of, conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So we just had this investment by Lending Club last year, or by Google last year in Lending Club. We had Sequoia and BlackRock becoming partners with Prosper. So this has been a huge year for validity, and it will continue to be that way. I mean, it's going to become even more so with an IPO. I mean, Lending Club was valued as one of the few tech companies in the world worth over $2 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So that's a big deal. I mean, that means Lending Club how come Lending Club doesn't have the notoriety of Twitter, and yet it's valued the same?
Right.
So, it's just going to have this IPO is a big deal, and it's going to continue. I think it's going to help people understand peer-to-peer lending, and it's going to help institutionalize it as a part of the American kind of borrowing and lending practice. Because as you see, the kind of the downfall of large financial systems because of their inefficiency and their inability to compete with Lending Club pricing wise, this is going to become more of a national conversation, and that's definitely going to be encouraged by an IPO and by Prosper hitting profitability this year, unless things change. So it's going to be a big year for everybody. I think the main thing that I'm really excited about, and I would actually really be interested to hear your take on this, is the emergence of data for retail investors. So in the past, we had people like Ken start us off with loss factors over at LensStats. And, it kind of grew from there to include Michael Phillips with Nickel Steamroller and Bryce, a little after that with peer-to-peer picks. But now you really start seeing this very exponential growth. So now you have Lending Robot, and you have, this Think Fast Suit guy, and you have all this, you have lots and lots of people who are helping retail investors enter into API bidding.
Yep.
You have, Lending Robot has this really cool Loan Explorer tool, which is totally free, and it doesn't, it offers all that kind of things happening. I mean, you're going to have, the people like Blue Vestment who are going to be screen scraping Folio. This is just the beginning. So if I had to make a prediction for this year, I would say this is going to be the year of data tools for retail investors. I think what we've had in the past has been good, but you're going to see, maybe as much as a quarter of all peer-to-peer retail investors taking advantage of these tools, because there's such a benefit to automating your bidding versus going on I don't know, maybe I'm shooting high there with saying a quarter of them, but it is such a benefit to doing it automated through an API, through something like Lending Robot or Nickel Steamer Premium, versus trying to log on at 6 and watching as these institutions, pull out the rug from under you every time. So
right. No, I agree. I think there's going to be an explosion of that. I've been keeping track of those things, and I think what I would like to see is a little bit more. I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but I'm concerned that that some of these tools are not legal.
Yeah.
They're not. We've talked about that offline, but that's. I think I would love to see an explosion of those tools where they are all legal now, 100%, and not only legal and not necessarily endorsed by Lending Club, because they're probably not going to do that, but at least tacitly kind of. They're going to be tacitly at least approved, not necessarily endorsed. And that's the key, because right now, I spoke with Scott Sanborn just 2 weeks ago. It's not there. There is not an endorsement or approval of any of these sites yet.
Yeah. And I'm to be honest, I'm a little. Well, first of all, I do not like screen scraping. I'm just going to put that critique out there. Yeah. I think the Blue Vestment and people like Rev over at Interest Radar are great guys, and they have an interesting tool. But people got to be really careful when it comes to screen scraping, specifically with auto selling on Folio. I know, boy, that is crazy.
I think it's a great tool in theory. Only. Yeah, it's not a great tool, and people use it and love it. So it's each to their own. It's Well, hey, they use it and love it until it accidentally all prices every loan they have for a penny. So I'm. But that said, you're right. What we do is what we need to have is we need to have. I mean, to be honest, it's a similar argument as the tax advantages that capital gains has, but how peer-to-peer lending does not have any sort of specific tax structure. I think to some degree we need a healing of the financial liabilities that go into a service like Interest Radar, and so that these guys don't get caught with their pants down and some giant thing happens. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, understood. Yeah. Anyway, we're out of time here, Simon.
Sure.
I could chat with you for another hour or two. No problem at all. It's a lot of fun. But let's just end up here. Where do you want to just give your website a plug for everybody?
A plug? Yeah. I mean, I've continued to just love writing about the education around this asset class, and I've. Yeah, it's been a great experience. Over the next 12 months, we're going to. I'm looking at right now the studio which has been built here for LendingMemo. We're going to be having a really cool video studio to be able to do education through that medium. So yeah, who knows where this is going to go? I'm interested to see it for myself. Actually, this is kind of fun. I'm interested in trying to build out some sort of interesting side tools. People like Michael are going to be much better at doing some sort of back testing tools, but I'm interested in creating some sort of like a peer-to-peer lending simulator. What would it look like to have how they have those stock simulators where you can kind of invest in stocks, but you don't actually front any money, and you could see kind of where your investment would go up or down. I'm interested in creating some sort of little peer-to-peer lending investment simulator so that people could, let's say, pretend this thing that they put this investment forward and see how it changes over every time you clicked forward, it would simulate a month would go by and a certain percentage of them would default and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to find someone in Seattle to help contract out to create that sort of tool. So we have some fun stuff happening.
Cool.
So.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Simon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay. See ya.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much for listening. Just one point I want to emphasize that Simon and I discussed, and that is the Lending Club IPO. I really believe, like Simon does, that this is going to be a watershed moment for the peer-to-peer lending industry. It's going to raise awareness probably more than any other thing that's happened. And it's going to really bring many new investors as well as many new borrowers into the fold. And I'm very excited about it. And you're going to hear more about the Lending Club IPO as we get closer. And of course, we're assuming it does happen sometime this year. And we will be addressing this both on the blog and here on the podcast. So with that, I'm going to sign off. But before I do, just one last request. Whether you're listening to this on Stitcher or on iTunes, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me an honest review. Let me know what you think. I really appreciate it. So with that, thanks a lot, and we'll talk again soon.